Hi, my name is Andrew Berry and welcome to At the Bench's YouTube channel. In this short film, we're going to be looking at soldering again, but something that is slightly different. You know, when you come to solder, you have to make sure that your surfaces are lovely, clean, spotless, no grease, no marks, no oxides, to get that solder to flow. Now in this film, I'm going to show you ways to stop the solder from flowing. Now that does sound very strange, but surely you're saying, well, surely we want solder to flow no matter what. And yes, we do, but only where we want it to flow. For instance, if you're soldering several pieces onto a ring, for instance, and you're soldering right next to another joint, and you don't want the solder to start to melt and to flow everywhere on the joint by the side of you, you can use one of these products here. Or you want to restrict the flow of solder to a specific area. Perhaps you've got some stones, a pave set or flush set right next to where you're trying to solder, or you really have a nice intricate texture, an intricate pattern that you want to stop the solder from flowing onto. Well, in addition to having the area you want the solder to flow nice and clean, the idea is then to have the area that you don't want the solder to flow on to be dirty. Now, there are lots of ways in addition to what we've got on our bench here that will stop the flow of solder. And I'm going to do a bit of an experiment and show you exactly what I mean. The most obvious type of condition the solder won't flow is on an oxide. That is where perhaps you have heated up a piece of metal and it's oxidized. It's oxidized from the air and the heat of the torch. Well, solder will not flow upon an oxide. And whilst we can use that as an example, let's look at some of these products that every household has got, especially a jeweller's bench. And that is rouge, powdered rouge. We have in this little tub here. This is exactly like the rouge that you get in a bar, just like this one here, but it is powdered. You can mix that with a little bit of water and a little bit of soap. That's the trick. Or a little bit of washing up powder, detergent, just to break down the surface tension of the water. You mix up a little paste of the rouge and paint it on the area that you want the solder not to flow upon. Brilliant, fantastic, my number one go-to product. How about Tipex, correction fluid? That will stop the flow of solder, but you must be careful with this product because the fumes it gives off once you put the heat on it are really quite nasty. So always do that within a ventilated area in front of a window, or come back away from where you're soldering whilst that burns, and that will stop the flow of solder. You can also use a bit of a wax as well. In the past, I've used something like Renaissance wax to put upon the area. The problem with Renaissance wax is that when you heat it up, it does tend to flow a little bit. So you really have to put this on very sparingly where you don't want the solder to flow. Another product is yellow ochre. This is in a simple child's paint box as we got here. Yellow ochre is this color by here. Again, you can use that and paint that upon the area you don't want the solder to flow. So let me just quickly go through an example of these 4 products here upon a piece of silver to show you how we can restrict the flow of solder. I've got some scrap silver here I'm just going to be playing around with. I'm not using a nice decent bit of silver. This is just some scrap that I've cut off a project recently. Now remember, when we remove this paper, it always looks like the surface is really clean, but it isn't. If you want the solder to flow, well then you should really clean the surface. What I'm going to do is get a piece of emery paper and I'm just going to clean the whole surface. So in theory, the solder will flow across the whole surface because now it is lovely and clean. We have removed any sticky, any oxides off this silver, and the solder will flow. So what I'm going to do is get my paintbrush, and I'm just going to use a little bit of rouge to start off with. I'm going to do some rouge, I'm going to do some correction fluid, I'm going to do some yellow ochre, and I'm really not too sure whether this Renaissance wax is going to work, but let's try and find out. So what we're going to do is get a little bit of this powdered rouge. I'm just going to paint it. I got a little bit on the lid here. This is what it looks like when it's all moistened. And what I'm going to do is do a little area like this, and I'm going to put my solder right in the middle of that little area there. So that's my rouge there. I'm going to use a bit of Tipp-Ex on the next one. Shake this up. And again, I can paint this exactly where I want the solder to flow, and I'm restricting it to these little squares that we've got here. So that's my correction fluid, my Tipp-Ex. Got some yellow ochre for the next one. Mix that up. Again, we're going to paint that onto our surface. Again, we're going to restrict the flow to these little areas here. And then some Renaissance wax. It's going to be the hardest one really to apply. And what I'm going to do with this is just rub this onto the area. And again, leave a small little square that we've got. You can hardly really see that area, but there it is just by there. The problem is that I have a feeling that when I'm going to heat this up, and that wax is going to blend into the little area that we've got. Okay, so now we need to put something on here now that will get the solder to flow. I'm going to use a bit of borax. Now when you come to use borax, you don't want the borax to be really, really moist. It has to be quite a thick paste, because what you don't want to do is to get the borax to go onto these areas that we have put this on. Otherwise, it's going to mix up with the yellow ochre. It's going to mix up with the rouge. In fact, I think I still got a little bit on there. Let me just wipe that off a second. Get my bit of solder. I'm going to put a bit of solder in each of my holes that we've got there. And I'm going to show you exactly what is going to happen. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 pieces of solder. And we're going to put those into the areas that we've got. And what you're going to find is the solder is going to be confined to the area that it's locating in. So we're just gently going to warm this up. We're going to see what's going to happen. So you can see the correction fluid here, the yellow ochre, the rouge, and this is my Renaissance wax. Let's see what's going to happen when the solder melts. There we go, solder has melted, it's melted, it's melted, melted there. There we go. The solder would have flowed further, but as you can see, the solder has been kept to the confinement of the area where we have painted the rouge, the correction fluid, the yellow ochre, and not quite the Renaissance wax. Let's just pop that in the water a second to show you. Okay, there we go. So you can see how the solder is confined to those spaces. And you can see how we cleaned the whole surface. We cleaned it with the emery paper. So really the solder could have flowed across the whole surface, but we put a barrier. We used the rouge. Rouge is always my favorite, but you must make sure the rouge is completely dry and the borax solution or the flux is quite a thick paste. You don't want it too runny, otherwise that's going to mix then with the rouge or with the yellow ochre, and it'll sort of all mingle and the solder won't flow at all. So that is the way that we can get our solder guaranteed not to flow, which is strange, but there are circumstances when you really don't want that solder to flow. My name is Andrew Berry for At The Bench's YouTube channel. Don't forget, if you haven't done already, please subscribe by clicking down below, or at the end of the film, click on my lovely face. And don't forget, please share this particular film with all your friends, because this is a technique that is really, really important to learn and to understand and know how to do. But thanks for watching. My name is Andrew Berry for At The Bench's YouTube channel. See you on the next film. Bye-bye.